Hello, I'm Nicholas Love, Chief Executive Officer with the Kulur Group, and welcome to another edition of With Love, where we're featuring some of the most emerging, dynamic, dope talents in a variety of sectors. People who have great stories, great personalities, and they have something that the next generation needs to not only take heed of, but leverage going forward. Joining me today is Bree Franklin. And certainly we're going to get into her story later on. But first and foremost, thank you very much for the opportunity to connect. Certainly you were recognized as one of the top 25 dope thinkers to watch in 2025. And I'm sure you're going to be dropping some unapologetic gems that justifies why you made the list. So thank you very much for joining me today.
Oh my gosh, I was so incredibly honored to have been asked and to even made the list. It just all happened, super quickly, and really appreciate the opportunity to add my voice to the conversation today.
Well, absolutely. Well, your voice is needed on certainly a very critical topic. But first and foremost, I got to start off today's podcast by asking you this question: who is Bree Franklin, and what's your superpower?
Mm. I mean, on paper, people are like, "Oh, you're so philanthropic, and you're so social impact oriented, and you're such a problem solver." But I think my superpower is being able to be resilient. Truthfully, I used to say it was communicating and being able to empathize, but I really do think resilience, just because there are so many factors that, as they say, pressure makes diamonds. I'm like, if I'm a diamond, then I'm like a 20 carat, you know what I'm saying? Because there are just so many different forces that be that, as we're seeing now playing out, have very ill intentions and have been an affront to the work that I do and what I represent and who I am fundamentally. So certainly I would categorize it in that one way.
Resiliency. I love it. I love it. Talk to me a little bit, I guess, as a follow-up term in terms of what does resiliency mean to you?
It means, just being the, the embodiment of stick-to-itiveness and not taking no for an answer, but also charging forward even when all chips are down against you. Just because, even the biblical roots of that, of continuing to pray through very dire circumstances, continuing to have faith despite everything around you looking completely abhorrent, and being, everyone else saying like, are you sure you want to keep going at this? Because I don't see any fruit, in the land that you're walking on. And just being able to say, like, I see the vision and I'm following that vision. And I know you mean well, but respectfully, I need you to stay over there, stay out my way so that I can see the promised land and get there. And so I think it just really comes down to boldness, and just being able to walk with that confidence, even if on the inside you're like, yeah, no, they're all right. I don't see anything. I don't see any signs of life, no promising indicators, but I know that this vision was on my spirit and in my heart for a reason, and I'm going to see it through.
The doors of the church are open, ladies and gentlemen.
Let's get on.
It's
Early
early.
going. Yes.
No, I really love that. And I guess that brings me to really a natural segue to another question, which is, if you talk about resiliency and you talk about boldness, what would be the additional, or the trifecta, if you will, type of advice that you would give for the next generation of leaders? Because certainly resiliency, I can only imagine, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're starting into a new role, whether you're elevating into another level in terms of your personal life, right? There's going to be trials and tribulations that we all face. So resiliency is very much cemented at the core element, I would imagine. I hear you talk about boldness, but what else? What would be your advice for the next generation of leaders?
Oh gosh. Be focused, tune out distractions, because I think part of resilience is having that reinforcement around you, because you definitely can't do it in a silo. You certainly cannot go any journey alone. People who are so-called self-made, like, sure, they may not have had a traditional, thing handed down to them or passed down, but please don't get it twisted. They had plenty of help. They had a tribe, a village, networks, connections, people that they were able to work with and collaborate with to reach their end game. So Certainly just, having that focus though to tune out the noise and having the discernment to know the difference. Because I will say, like, there's plenty of times where, in the name of trying to be resilient, I was actually being defiant and making boneheaded decisions, right? But because I was just thinking, like, you just don't understand and you just haven't walked this walk, I was kind of banging my head against the wall. But then there have been other times where the advice that was being offered to me in the name of wisdom and meaning well, I still to this day look back and I'm like, I am so glad I did not listen to that person. I am so glad that I followed my gut instead. So discernment truly is the key to that focus, because you're going to have a lot of forces and people and influences trying to get through to you, for better and for worse. And you just got to have that internal compass to know the difference.
It's something that you said that I want to really kind of call out, because you hear a lot of people these days talking about this ideology, this fallacy, in my opinion, of being self-made, right? And certainly I'm a big fan of a behavioral psychologist at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business named Dr. Linda Genzel. And she came out with a book a few years ago talking about choosing leadership, right? And in that workbook, she talked about the differences between experiences and happenings, right? Yeah. And if you don't process various things, then it just happens to you. It only becomes an experience, right, when you've been able to kind of process it. And when I hear people talk about being self-made, it would give the indication that they've done nothing but had things happen to them. Right. When in reality, right, we're shaped by the experiences that we have in life, which are all variety of inputs that ultimately lead you down a certain pathway. Does the term self-made need to go away?
I honestly have a lot of arguments in favor of that. Yes, I do think self-made, depending on how deep we can get here, I do think it is a construct of white supremacy and certain institutions in this country that have basically tried to say that it's all a meritocracy, right? It's just a matter of how hard you work, pulling them bootstraps up until they fall off the daggone shoe. Like, I think that it was intended to inspire, and again, I'm trying to be in the headspace of always assuming the best of intent, but also being realistic about where society was when that term was first coined, which I don't have the exact date for, but I would venture to say within the last maybe couple 100 years, like 100, 200. And I just feel that it is not accurate, because I think it speaks to just, okay, you didn't let people stop you, you didn't make excuses, and sure, those are noble attributes, but it's like, in the name of not being stopped, you had to go get a job somewhere, someone employed you, or you made a phone call to someone, you weren't just talking to yourself. It's like, I do think that it needs to be phased out, because it also sends people the wrong message about how the so-called successful and the rich and the wealthy got to where they are. It takes networks, it takes collaboration, it always takes community. And even if you're just the go-getter, initiative-taking person of the bunch, you're still part of a bunch.
Absolutely. No, well said. It is particularly in today's world where DE&I is being redefined, being challenged, being exploited, being used as a scapegoat. I recently came out with an article around the differences between merit and the fallacy of how DE&I is supposedly being tried to be repositioned. And the reality of the situation is that there's a demographic where the conversation really needs to be had around who really didn't earn it, because there's going to be a subset, right, of people who have been in positions because of nepotism over qualifications. There are people who are in positions because of relationships, or they were born into wealthy environments. And this is going to take me to my next question. And then there are going to be people who have failed a lot, but despite the failing, continue to ascend based on nothing but the color of their skin. And as a Black man, when I hear the term didn't earn it, when I hear people saying and I think about the challenges and the grind that I've been on personally, but there's a perception that based on the color of my skin, there's a level of intellectual deficiency
Mhm.
is disrespectful,
Mm.
right? And so one of the things that I do the most with love, right, is I pour into people and I try to inspire people and I try to understand what have been their triggers, what has kind of gotten them where they're at, and what do they feel has prevented them to get them where they want to go, and understanding how that person is built, because we're all built differently, right? But the opportunity to develop, to lead, to influence, to guide, these are some of the things that I do the most with love. And so with that being stated, Bree, I gotta ask you this question. What do you do the most with love?
Mm. Well, defining it was step one for me. I started truly intensively in therapy about 2.5, almost 3 years ago. And that was really building block number one. Just on the personal front, I just come out of a long-term relationship. Things did not end very well. And it was just a glaring lesson for me to, just first of all, get clear on what is love.
Mm,
I read the book, All About Love by Bell Hooks. And then, that's when I started really actually reading and being a student of the Bible. And then also coupled with my counselor, I came to realize God is love. So it was tapping into my um, divine connection, to the Almighty, and through experiencing the love that He had for me unconditionally, that I was able to then absorb and to use to heal wounds and to nurture and even breaking generational cycles. And that, of course, helped me be not just a better, person on the personal front, like with my family and friends, but certainly poured out professionally and just how I went about different interactions and work engagements, assuming the best, as I just touched on, like not trying to always carry ill intent when I'm looking at something that didn't go right. But in terms of, now having that under my belt, I operate in love through just gentleness wherever I can, like always, always, always thinking about what another person could have been going through, whether that person has wronged me or even if it's just someone on the street with road rage. I'm like, that they may have gotten some really bad news, which nowadays, way more likely than not, whether it be a job loss or a familial loss or a health happening that has just completely left them blindsided, just having empathy, having grace, having compassion, the fruits of the spirit, right, as the scripture talks about in Galatians. So just being able to really internalize that and not just say, because I think I've seen, not I think, but I have seen in other cultures language around love. Like there's so many different ways to express it. Whereas here in America, we're like, oh, I love burgers. I love this restaurant. I love this artist. Like we just appropriate it for kind of everything and it loses its potency. But in other languages, it's on reserve. Like there's other ways to communicate those thoughts. But when you're telling someone, I love you, it has its own special phrasing. And I think that's really sacred and something that I try to do my best to internalize and pour out as well.
that was deep. That was deep. That was really well received. This idea of things being on reserve. Um, in some sense, um, when things are being put on reserve, there's a deeper degree of intentionality, value, focus, right? Because everyone doesn't get access to it.
Mhm.
Um, hmm, which I would imagine has played a role in the Prosperity Project. Um, Talk to us first and foremost around what the Prosperity Project is and your story of how you kind of went down this pathway.
Of course. So prosperity came into the world at a very critical time, summer 2020. And that was my answer to the Black Lives Matter resurgence, when DE and I first took off and became mainstream and was actually wanted in society, um, allegedly.
Right.
And it was, my personal way of doing what I could with what I had to the best of my ability to make a difference about something that I was deeply impacted by. So, winding the clock back further, I was not the first in my family to go to college. Actually, I'm third generation, which I realize in the Black community is actually quite rare.
Yeah.
But I was the first to go Ivy League. And so, just as I was hitting late middle school and certainly high school, I was a straight A student, major nerd, principals list every semester, you name it. And so everyone just saw for me, oh, you have to go to an Ivy League school. Like that's exactly where you belong, and you'll do so well, and that'll give you the best jobs and all this stuff. And so these conversations started happening at age 12, and I'm just, of course, a tween, and I'm just taking everyone's word at face value. So that was the route that I pursued. I ended up getting into Dartmouth, which I attended, and it really just basically provided the foundations for living a major problem that I was completely blind to at the time. So my sophomore year is when things got a little sticky on the home life front, and I ended up having to take out way more debt than either of my parents intended. And that number ended up becoming $100,000 in principal, right? But as we know, that ugly eye of interest is always waiting at the door after your forbearance period has exhausted. And so, again, as like by that point at early 20 something, I'm still very much aloof and in the dark and not realizing the gravity of what I had signed myself up for. And so within 2 years, that 100,000 figure went to 116. And a lot of that was privately held debt. So, they have so much power and ability and autonomy to just do what they want. The terms are very deceptive, and I just sign my name on every dotted line because all I'm thinking about is getting this degree, graduating, and living out all the promises that were fed to me as a teenager. So, I ended up racking up tons of debt from my education, and unfortunately, it was very incongruent with the money that I was actually able to bring in, because a lot of my peers, and this goes back to the generational wealth component, and just having legacy and not being self-made, right? A lot of my peers, they were legacy Ivies, and so they knew the game. They had parents, aunts, uncles, grandparents, mentors, family friends to help them fast track and to optimize those 4 years and get them thinking about internships, building out a robust network, leveraging the Dartmouth ecosystem as a freshman, like things that were just totally not even remotely on my radar. So, not to make excuses, but that was just the facts, right? Like my family so often admitted, like, we wish we could help you. Like we wish we did know people we could call on to help get you an internship X, Y, and Z, but it was what it was. So coming through that, and then in the job climate, my first job was with a PR company locally in Atlanta. It was a contract, so it was over after 3 months. And then I'm like, oh, I wasn't prepared for that, like to have to restart the search all over again and then rinse and repeat for what would be about a year and a half. And then I was just, making ends meet and trying to scrape together what I could to stay on top of the loans. But of course, the ratio was just wildly out of proportion with what I was able to bring in. So just feeling that frustration and living it, and working at times like minimum wage and just contract and temp work just to get something that I could put towards the debt, it really set a powerful tone and gave me so much more empathy that I'm so glad I have, to be able to be of service to the community at scale. And so going back to, summer of 2020, that was my moment to just connect all those dots, the experience, the distance traveled, the empathy, and then also meeting the moment, and then galvanizing with my friends, to start up the nonprofit. It was 5 of us on the original founding team, and then within 6 months, we had like 45 volunteers. And our entire ethos was helping level the playing field for those that were disenfranchised by predatory lending and debt constraint. So we ran 2 cohorts of our 35 to Free initiative, which is our flagship program, serving Black women, because those 35 numbers are $35 billion in debt and 35% rate of financial literacy that group holds across the US. And so it was just starting with what we knew, largely intuition and divine timing driven, and just being able to, put one foot in front of the other and take it a day at a time. And ultimately, we're very fortunate to find early success and lots of support and capital, most importantly, to make that happen, and to finally start to turn the tide.
Well, so when I say to you that money is not just math, it's psychology, how do you interpret that?
I completely agree. I think money at a basic level, yes, budgeting and just having addition, subtraction, like all the things, we're taught at a basic level in school. It's that simple in terms of configuring the numbers, but it's like to configure the numbers, psychology is 100% at the root of that, because I've learned such thing as financial trauma. I am a regular of the FinCon community. I've been to 3 conferences now, and that's where I first saw that term in plain text. And I was like, oh, wait, that is something I can relate to. When you have been scarred by scarcity, by overdrafting your account, by falling in deep to debt that you just cannot afford, all of those things can compound and take down your confidence and put you in a infantilized mindset almost. And I've seen that in other conference settings, just people who you would think at their age, 50 plus, 60 plus, they are asking questions commensurate with what middle schoolers should be asking. And that's no knocks at all to them. It just shows like, wow, there is such a huge disparity between financial education and that learning curve keeping up with just the modern economic shifts and changes. And so I do think that math is like the vessel, but the psychology is what gets poured in. Like if someone has a strong money mindset, they have confidence, they have the self-esteem, they don't have trauma, or they have healed that trauma, it will carry them a lot further.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, into the psychology aspect in terms of what you just talked about with regards to confidence, it extends into so many other different areas, right? I'm not Kevin Samuels, right? But you heard the whole high value men, high value women thing, right? And at the cusp, I mean, whether you like the style or not, shout out to the noob. The one thing that he would kind of come back to, right, in terms of assessing or identifying what high value was and the differences between the particular genders, right, is the expectation. And what you often heard him say, particularly when talking to women or even talking to men, is, okay, well, if this is the lifestyle that you want, what does a person need to earn to be able to foster that lifestyle? Mm-hmm. And to the element of psychology and confidence, right? Like, yeah, I might be making 6 figures. Yeah, I can feel like I can walk into a room and say, okay, well, I might have a fighting chance. But if I'm below the poverty line, regardless of how intelligent, how well kept, how smooth I might be with the mouthpiece, right? If I don't have the financial backing, then my confidence level in being able to execute and maintain or sustain a particular lifestyle is going to be impacted. And I think, again, despite what people might have thought around his style of delivery, that was at the crux of what he was saying. And I think there's a lot of weight and a lot of depth to it. So hopefully I wasn't judged by saying shout out to the noobs, but achievement in every field of human endeavor. And I stand on business with that. So certainly, we're going to wrap this up very soon. But obviously, this is a podcast that is powered by the Kulur Group, and I would be remiss if I didn't ask you this question. What's your favorite color and why?
My favorite color is like I've had several over the years, and they were all for very superficial reasons, but I would actually say purple. I know that it's the color of royalty, and it just, I I appreciate especially the lighter shades, maybe even like a soft lavender. To me, it feels like spring, and my birthday's in spring, so that's always, reminiscent for me. But it just also, the lavender scent, I think it all like ties the senses together. That puts me at peace. It puts me at ease. So yeah, I would have to probably go with that one just because of sentimental reasons and it, just also more superficiality. It looks gorgeous on just about everything.
Cool. So one of our sub brands of the Color Group is, we have two of them, Dope Thinkers Only and then Dope Thinkers. If you're interested where I got this hat from, dopethinkersonly.com. But what we describe a dope thinker as someone who is elevating categories, products, people, and culture through the lens of diverse and inclusive intelligence. Certainly, you fit that bill, hence why you were on the list for 2025. But would love to hear from you to name 3 of the dopest thinkers that you know and why.
No personally or know of?
Know of or know personally? Who's ever in your orbit?
Okay. It's like one of those things where it's like, what's your favorite artist? And suddenly everyone's discography vanishes from memory. But if I'm getting back into the groove, I would say Rihanna. So I've done a lot of, like interviews and been asked like, who, would you love to be mentored by? I love her vision. I love how she was able to bounce back from a very trying time financially herself. A lot of people don't know that she almost went to zero because of bad people in her corner on the accounting side that had her net worth dwindling beneath, 2 million, which it's like, to the average person, it sounds like, okay, what's the big deal? But, for her status and what she had earned up to that point, it was way under par. So to go from that to, I think within 7-8 years of launching the Fenty brand, that was iconic. And of course, now she's well past the $1 billion mark. So shout out to her. Second, I would probably say Rosa Parks, Miss Rosa, just the way that she defied everyone around her. I study her fight, and of course we're taught about it every year during this time, especially BHM, but just the fact that she was like, I'm tired, and that's that on that, and how that sparked an entire movement, being able to, I don't think she realized in the moment what she was really fighting for or how impactful it would be in the grand scheme of history. But I'm just like, to say like, this is common sense and y'all are tweaking, like in 1960s speak, right? So I think that was dope. And then I would actually say from the Bible, Abigail. So she is a very, very, very understudied figure of the Bible. I know we usually hear about Queen Esther and Deborah and Lydia, but Abigail, her husband was basically running his mouth and about to get himself killed, and she took it upon herself to basically send a message, I believe it was to King David, and just basically say, don't mind him, and kind of, save their family. And when her husband found out what was actually at risk of happening to him had she not done that, he died from shock. And so he ended up losing his life anyway. And then she ended up, I believe, being one of David's wives. And but just the way that she took matters into her own hands, especially in the biblical days, like, do you know how bold you have to be to swerve out of your lane as a woman and check a man in power? Like a man at all, but certainly a man with authoritative rule over a nation. So I just was like blown away when I learned her story and, really took it upon myself to model my actions after that. So that's my 3.
I hear a lot of intentionality and purpose. And I've heard that kind of continuously throughout this conversation. And so I will close with love, this episode with love, with this particular question. What do you believe your purpose is?
Oh man, I could give you the diplomatic answer or the real talk answer. The real talk answer. I was put on this earth to shake ish up. I was here to disrupt, to innovate, and to basically, as Gandhi has said, to be a part of building the world that I would like to see. I know for sure that I was put on this earth to do more than just pay bills and expire. I was meant to have true impact and to shape society, and bring it into accordance with the vision of God. I think that there's so much room for improvement, not just with the student debt crisis, but obviously different socioeconomic factors and crises going on, certainly the wars and just all kinds of things that are perilous and are completely cancerous to nations and just our global health and community. So definitely to disrupt and to make sure that I am leaving this earth better than how I found it.
Well, as the CEO of a challenger brand agency, something tells me that we'll certainly be on that pathway and that road together.
Yes,
So
we will.
thank you very much for your time. Unapologetic gems, love them. Free jewelry to pick up off the floor. But Bree Franklin, thank you so much for your time, and
Pleasure.
hopefully we can do this again sometime.
You know it. I'm always down.
All right, you take care.